Good evening and welcome to Insider. I'm Alec Pollard. Thanks for joining. Over a month since the ceasefire in Gaza went into effect, but low-scale warfare continues in the Strip. Inside the yellow line, under Israeli control. In the other half of Gaza, outside Israeli influence, Hamas remains largely in charge and still armed. Meanwhile, the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, tasked with delivering aid and diverting it away from Hamas, is disbanding, handing operations over to the new Civil Military Coordination Center. Can it and other international organizations be trusted? Can international forces from countries like Azerbaijan and Indonesia counter Hamas's influence? What's the future of Gaza? To break it down, I'm joined by Olga Deutsch, Vice President of NGO Monitor, with us here in studio, and Dr. Eric Mandel, the founder and director at MEPIN, the Middle East Political and Information Network, joining us from Florida. Thank you, both of you, very much for being here with us. I'm going to start with you, Eric, with the situation in Gaza. The fighting is still ongoing over there, as we see in some parts of the Strip. And it seems like Hamas will remain armed in Gaza unless Israel is the one to disarm them. Can any of these international forces that have been talked about actually prevent Hamas from being in control and armed in Gaza?
I think it is a fantasy to believe that anyone other than the IDF is going to be able or willing to disarm Hamas. And Hamas knows that. The international force, they've made it clear that they are not going to disarm and demilitarize. We'll break it down. There's disarming, that means taking away the weapons. Hamas right from the beginning said, no, we're going to be able to keep defensive weapons, which meant that they were going to break it immediately. And then there's demilitarization, which means going into the tunnel network. And the majority of the tunnels, a little unbeknownst to most people, are still intact, even in the western part of Gaza, the 47% that are there. The countries do not want to be, the Arab countries and Muslim countries do not want to be perceived as doing Israel's work. And I don't blame them, not for that, but I don't blame them for worrying that Hamas, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, which happily President Trump halfway has gone to hopefully claim is a foreign terrorist organization. They don't want their citizens to die at the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood and then become targets for international terrorism. And so what's going to happen? There's two parallel situations. One, Israel in the north seemingly is being allowed to do what it needs to do to Hezbollah with American approval. But I don't see that American approval going to allow Israel to do what it really needs in Gaza. And so we're in a very difficult situation. Thereafter tonight, there will be only two remaining hostage remains that are still there. And so right now, I think Gaza is, I wouldn't even say a mixed bag. It's a place where Hamas, by strategy, giving up the live hostages, knew it was going to create a situation that it would not only be the dominant force, but really the overwhelming force in Gaza. And they are going to they play the long game, look for another day, and will have a slow attrition war against Israel in the eastern part of Gaza.
Right. Olga, NGO Monitor, for years you have tracked how NGOs abuse, misuse aid that's given to the Palestinians and just provide outright cover for terrorist organizations. Is there any organization that could or will operate in Gaza that you trust?
Well, it's a question we get all the time, and it's sadly not an easy one to answer. There is no one way to whitelist organizations, because I don't think anyone can or should take responsibility for another organization. They can say and claim one thing today and a completely different thing tomorrow. What is needed and is actually of a historical importance right now, as we discuss the day after in Gaza, and let us just frame it. Right now, everyone is talking that the reconstruction of Gaza will cost around $70 billion, right? Now, anywhere until now, humanitarian aid and development aid, anywhere between 10% and 1/4 of it actually went as non-physical aid. Most of us will think that it's usually diapers and baby formula and medicine or tents or concrete, right? And we know that even those were stolen, appropriated, and used to build Hamas police state in Gaza. But anywhere between 10% and 1/4 actually goes into political advocacy projects. Now, when you add that into the mix, then you actually get Palestinian terror proxy organizations going after us, after our soldiers around the world, ICC, ICJ, lawsuits trying to prevent us from getting U.S. military aid through F-35 programs and so on. So the only way to condition this aid, to make sure that the reality in Gaza is different than it was before, is to completely revamp. How do we control? How do we vet? Who are our partners? Who do we send in? How do we monitor the organization's work throughout the period? And if anyone is caught working with Hamas or any other group, because Hamas is not the only one, let's not forget the Islamic Jihad and PFLP are still fully operating terror organizations.
Islamic Jihad were involved now in the release of
the hostages,
of one of the last Israeli remains in Gaza.
And the three of them took part on October the 7th. The three of them were shooting rockets after October the 7th, and all three held hostages. Now, part of this problematic is also the UN and all the UN structures, including UNRWA. UNRWA is the most symbolic one, but it's not the only one. It's one of 34 approximately agencies operating there. So it begs the question, and I think US is the only entity right now, the only player that can put a foot down and say, these are going to be the red lines. Anything beyond these red lines will just not be acceptable. If we talk about these conditions, UN is still to designate Hamas as a terrorist organization, right? I mean, it's a basic thing to think about.
Right, so there's some crucial things you brought up there, the United States involvement, and there's pressures in the Republican Party right now not to get over-involved in some of these issues, and also UNRWA, which we're going to get into both those subjects. But first, regarding the international organizations, we're going to come back to you, Eric. The Gaza Humanitarian Fund, they're ending their operations in Gaza. They delivered millions and millions of meals to Gazans and did their best to keep it out of the hands of Hamas. How would you assess how well or not well were their activities, how successful were their activities in Gaza, and also this new organization that's going to be taking over some of their activities, the Civil Military Coordination Center, that's commanded by Admiral Charles Bradford Cooper. It's going to be based, part of it, in Kiryat Gat, I believe, in Israel. There's going to be a counterpart with the Egyptians. So Gaza Humanitarian Fund, how did they do? And this new organization, can they do better?
So I have firsthand experience just a couple of months ago with the Gaza Humanitarian Fund and also some of the other agencies. I was there part of a journalist delegation that went into Gaza when they were claiming that there was starvation and not enough food, the quantity of food. And what I saw was acres and acres and acres and acres of food, including fresh fruit and vegetables. And I saw many UN trucks lined up. Gaza Humanitarian Fund was doing excellent work, but they became totally disparaged. And, of course, any of these organizations are going to be challenged because Hamas wanted to control and steal money, and they were, trying to create chaos to make Israel look bad. But I could just tell you that I've been in contact with former Americans as recently as yesterday who were part of the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, and I was reading how the Arab News, which is a mouthpiece of the Saudi government, referred to them as shooting at civilians and creating chaos, not to mention that Israel was targeting with live ammunition civilians and killing hundreds, which was far from the reality, but that was the reality that was painted going forward. You have to remember, Hamas's job here is to take the aid. There are two types of aid. There's aid that is food, and then there's more commercial aid. It doesn't make a difference. They're going to take it, steal it, tax it, and they are going to make a lot of money on it. And that is part of the way that they remain a dominant force, as I alluded to earlier. As far as Americans being involved here, America and right now really doesn't have the leverage it could, because the leverage it has is through two Muslim Brotherhood countries, Qatar and Turkey, whose interests are in Hamas staying there. And of course, Israel, rightly, for its national security interests, doesn't want to have Qatar or Turkey there. And so there's no incentive for them to put real pressure on Hamas to let international aid go around. Many of these other international aid companies, organizations, UNRWA, of course, being the most notorious or infamous, basically start with a narrative that Israel is the bad guy and will paint Israel in the worst possible light, despite me knowing I was actually in the 2014 war covering when a Maglan unit was being fired from an UNRWA children's clinic. So whether it's tunnels underneath or being used as bases, UNRWA and other alphabet soup of different organizations really cannot be trusted. And you have to expect the aid to be stolen. And Hamas is going to get stronger because of the aid. But as far as the humanitarian fund, it was effective. There was the great allegation that people had to walk a distance to go through a battlefield, if you will, to get the aid. But that was only because Hamas was creating the primary chaos of what was going on. They wanted it to fail. So I think it's something, when you look back, not perfect, but really did distribute a lot of aid and should be commended. And the way it's being disparaged at this point, and I'm somebody who's met with some former American soldiers who were part of it, and these were wonderful people. And as an American, I'm proud that they were involved in it. But again, when you go through the laundry room of the Middle East, how it was laundered, that it was not positive and they did bad things, much farther, the truth is much farther of really good things that they did.
Right, well, that wouldn't be the first time that we've seen reporting that isn't accurate about what's going on in Gaza. I'm going to ask both of you, because you both brought it up, the question of UNRWA. Crucial question about UNRWA. The Palestinians will demand that they remain active in Gaza, of course, but from Israel's perspective, UNRWA is one of the main facilitators of terrorism in Gaza, and also of the narrative that the Gazans don't belong in Gaza, but rather need to move into Israel via right of return. So the question is, what is going to happen with UNRWA in Gaza right now? Are they even how active are they in the current situation? And is Israel or the United States trying to put any pressure in order to remove some of the nefarious influence that UNRWA has? Start with you, Olga, about that.
Well, all of this entire issue is a political issue at the end of the day. Yes, there are challenges in providing humanitarian aid and how you check it, for sure. But even the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, that did a decent job, right, under incredibly difficult circumstances, right, was met with uniform criticism by the entire humanitarian community, including UNRWA and all the UN agencies. Basically, instead of working with them, they were criticizing them and boycotting them, which is part of the reason why it was so difficult for them to do anything on the ground.
What was their pretext for boycotting them?
Well, first of all, because Gaza Humanitarian Fund came in and said, our task is to provide aid, not to politicize or do political activism or work with Hamas, right? So the Americans came and said, we're contractors. There's a task. They almost approached it as a business enterprise, whereas the entire humanitarian community, all the NGOs, the international organizations, and all the UN agencies, for years, for decades, worked closely with Hamas, knew exactly what Hamas was doing. They were providing cash assistance, aid, allocations according to Hamas lists, and allowing Hamas to cut anywhere between 20 and 40% commission, basically tax, what Eric was talking about. So there were multiple layers of theft, right? Now, UNRWA was part of that problem. The Palestinians will insist to keep UNRWA because UNRWA is also a unique political institution perpetuating this image, this narrative of Palestinian right of return, where we all know, let's just demystify it and zoom out from the aid, right, issue. If there is a right to return, there is no Israel. We all understand what the stakes are.
And this is a contradiction from the UN, because the UN says they are for the two-state solution, yet they are funding and supporting the mission of UNRWA, which is a one-state.
And only working for one state, right?
Yeah.
Now, the Israeli government already outlawed UNRWA, basically said we are not to work with any entity, anything that has to do with UNRWA, which is already technically a complex situation. But whether they're called, I have very big reservations about any UN agency and their ability to do a different job or a significantly different job than UNRWA. But whatever we call them, the big question is, whoever ends up working and doing that job, they will still have to work with, 35,000 local employees, Gazans. Yeah. And they need to be controlled. They need to be vetted. They need to be held accountable that if they incite, if they teach hatred in schools, if they call for violence or are Hamas operatives, they need to be sanctioned. Whether UNRWA can do it or someone else, the demand is ultimately the same. And it's the Gazans who also have been towing the line, if for no other reason, because they don't know any different reality. This is their only reality, living in a Hamas-led police state. It's not the international community would like to discuss Gaza and the day after in the terminology that we understand, which is liberal democracies, right? But that is not the reality in Gaza. The reality in Gaza is a complete Stasi-like police state.
Right, Eric, we're kind of running out of time, so we're going to move a bit on from UNRWA and the Muslim Brotherhood, which is something that you talked about earlier, because U.S. President Donald Trump banned the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States now, or has declared his intention to do so, which is a massive, massive move. And of course, Hamas is the Palestine branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. But on the other hand, he's working with Qatar and Turkey, who have Muslim Brotherhood affiliation. So and Trump in general, I mean, he's dancing on a lot of different things here, kind of contradicting himself. So what is the real Trump, or is this all part of the grand plan to achieve a big deal in the Middle East?
Well, Trump in his first term wanted to declare the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign terrorist organization, but was basically fought against it. People made the claim, it's an ideology. How can you ban an ideology? But it's way more than an ideology. And it's organized mainly in secret, that has a long-term plan to infect the West with the virus of Islamism and sow discord and undermine the West. And I think you've seen parts of that that went on with the college campuses after October 7th. So it wasn't a total ban by President Trump. It looks like they're going to look at these case by case. And once you're going case by case, you know that Qatar and Turkey are going to get a pass. But what is Qatar and Turkey? Qatar is the financier of the Muslim Brotherhood. And Turkey, Erdogan, has turned that country from a secular Muslim state into an Islamist Muslim Brotherhood state. We'll call it the muscle of the Muslim Brotherhood.
So is that Trump, though, just showing some realism, though, maybe? Because he's done that in the past where, he showers praise on countries that may be not aligned with his values or America's values, but he knows he needs them in order to achieve what he wants to achieve, like maybe normalization or some other grand deal with the Palestinian Authority. He knows he needs Qatar and Turkey, like being realistic, perhaps? Or is that just a miscalculation of Trump?
So I think he's, at least what we know, is giving them way too much leeway. He should be behind the scenes pressuring these countries. Qatar has given sanctuary not only to Hamas, but to the Taliban and you name it, organizations that are across the radical Sunni jihadist world. It also works with the radical Shiite world closely with Iran. It is not a neutral party there. And so what we need to do here in America is to tell Qatar, you have a lot of good things that we like. We like your Al Udeid Air Base, but you have to stop infecting the world with Al Jazeera, which is anti-American, anti-Semitic. You, Turkey, have to stop wanting to replace Iran in control of Syria and turn that into an Islamist state with al-Shura. And I think, unfortunately, at least again on the surface, President Trump seems blind to these things and like these strong men that are there. But unless you deal with those two countries, you're going to have a real uphill battle. But in the United States, the one thing that we really have to get our handle on here is the Qatari Foundation run by the emir's mother, who is propagandizing and teaching education from K to 12 all through the universities, turning them into anti-American places, certainly anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic universities and K through 12, and it's infecting all there. We need to end Qatari foreign funding of our educational system. That is the Muslim Brotherhood in action.
Right. Just final question here, Olga, before we wrap up, regarding U.S. involvement, because as you said earlier, the only country that really can effectively do anything in Gaza is the United States. But on the other hand, the United States is influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood, and Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood. So from Israel's perspective, is this good, the developments that we're seeing?
Well, they're better than where we were, right? Let's imagine a parallel situation where Europeans were tasked with crafting a solution. So I think everything is relative. In that sense, we're okay with U.S. Taking the lead. But that said, I think, and I agree pretty much with Eric's opening remarks, that unless Israel takes charge and makes sure that Hamas is at least under control, I'm not as optimistic that we will actually succeed in disarming them, especially that disarming them, the challenge is not only weapons, physical weapons. Their sphere of political influence and their propaganda and their proxies they surpass the physical borders of Gaza. But as long as IDF and the Israeli government keep control and are extremely involved in what is going on, I think we will be able to control the situation, or at least maintain it. I think sadly, we're not where we would have wanted to be, which is solving the Gaza question after horrific 2 years.
It's like just another big round compared to all the rounds that happened, which is what Israel wanted to avoid.
And I've been sharing my concern from the beginning, right after October the 7th, that we should have ensured that we don't end up in yet another cyclical decade, right? Where there's going to be higher, lower cycles, but at the end of the day, it pretty much is shaping up to be exactly that.
Right. Well, that's, as we see, some positive things, some negative, very uncertain situation, and a very precarious situation at the moment, the situation in Gaza of what will be in the future. Not all of it is in Israel's hands. Part of it is in the hands of the United States and other players. We're going to have to wait and see how it all develops. Olga Deutsch, the Vice President of NGO Monitor, thank you so much for coming in and giving your analysis, and Dr. Eric Mandel, founder and director of the Middle East Political and Information Network, especially also that information on the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, setting the record straight. Thank you very much for that, both of you, for coming in. And that is all for this edition of Insider on ILTV. If you found this discussion valuable, please like, share, and subscribe for more analysis from Israel and the Middle East, and tune in to our 24/7 streaming channel and download the ILTV app. I'm Alec Pollard. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next edition of Insider.